Mayor Pete Buttigieg has already done something extraordinary in the 2020 presidential race, going from relative unknown to top-tier contender over the span of just a few months. Now the South Bend mayor is working to harness the momentum behind his candidacy into a campaign that can put him in the White House. And the mayor is our guest this morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you.
Okay, so you're out with the new mental health plan, and there's a big conjoined area there between mental health and drug abuse. Obviously, New Hampshire has the opioid crisis. So what do you envision happening here?
You know, I remember doing a town hall in Claremont, and I asked how many people knew somebody who was affected by addiction, and almost all of the hands went up. And it's not just here in New Hampshire, it's coast to coast, but certainly a big issue here. What we've got to do is recognize that all of these issues are connected. Mental health broadly, addiction in particular, and then what we have going on with the opioid crisis. And we've got to support communities developing their plans to do something about it. That's why I've proposed $10 billion a year in support in grants to help communities come up with solutions, but also we need to drive solutions at the systemic level. That means breaking the silence and ending the stigma around mental health and addiction. Remember, this is something that impacts just about every family, just about every workplace in some way, and yet it's still talked about sometimes like it's something to be ashamed of, or we got to kind of keep it in the corner. That's a cultural issue as well as a policy issue. On the policy side, what we've got to do is expand access to mental health providers and make it as routine as physical health is. Now, on the books, we have what's called parity. In theory, it means that insurers are supposed to cover mental health just as much as physical health. In reality, we don't see that happening. When I'm president, we're going to enforce that kind of parity so that we really do see the ability to access mental health resources just as much as physical health.
What about veteran suicides? It's almost mind-boggling that in this country we have almost 24 veterans a day taking their lives. What is your plan going to do about that?
You know, as a veteran, it's so disturbing to me to know how many people, often who were deployed into dangerous environments, survive their deployment but don't survive their battle with mental illness. It's why we got to make sure that there's more access to providers for veterans. It's why we got to reinforce what's available at the VA. You know, so many folks in the VA tell us that they just don't have the level of funding or the level of staff that they need. And we've got to do more with resources like telemedicine and telepsychiatry, not to replace in-person care, but as a supplement, especially when you're talking about rural areas where somebody might be a long way from the nearest VA facility or provider. There's a lot that you can do using those means, but only if we have the kind of wireless access and broadband in order to connect people in. And that's something else we got to work on, especially in rural areas.
The president sees mental health as a core issue in relation to the mass shootings that we see, unfortunately, so often in this country. Democrats are upset that he won't sort of allow the new gun laws to come into the conversation. But what do you think of that point, though, that even if you did take away all the guns, that you would still have these angry, disaffected, homicidal people out there willing to harm folks?
Well, the reality is somebody with mental illness is more likely to be a victim of violence than a perpetrator. And I think when the president tries to use mental illness and mental health as an excuse for inaction on guns, it makes it harder for us to act both around gun safety and around mental health. Now, what I will say is that we have a crisis of belonging in this country that is even deeper than things that are seen in the clinical environment. And I think it's contributing to deaths from despair, as they're called. That is not just opioids, but other overdoses, not just substance abuse, but suicide in general. And we are seeing this accelerate. Younger generation now is reporting to be the loneliest yet. And a majority of young people report very alarming things, like the idea that they don't feel anyone knows them well. The social isolation of seniors is taking years off the life of our seniors. We can do something about it, and it's one of the reasons why my plan for national service includes service opportunities for people, helping those struggling with addiction and helping get to know people of different generations to deal with that issue on the senior side.
Do you see any intersection between the mental health issue and the rise of white nationalism in this country, or is that a purely political problem?
You know, the vast majority of people who commit crimes are not doing it because of mental illness. We're talking about the intersection of hate and the availability of guns. Look, anybody with a mental illness needs to get treatment, but we also need to recognize that there is a range of issues around mental health. In the same way that with physical health, you have anything from a common cold to a serious case of cancer. Sometimes we talk about mental health like it's only extreme and serious mental illness, when actually there are routine experiences with depression that people should not be afraid to talk about. And part of destigmatizing mental health is recognizing that there are different levels of severity, instead of making it sound like every mental health challenge is something that could lead to a crime or a suicide.
The president just had a rally here in Manchester, about 12,000 people in the arena, another 8,000 or so on the outside. This Democratic primary has made him out essentially to be a racist. Those accusations are out there, a white nationalist. This crowd, though, there was some diversity. There were people of color. There was a large contingent of Vietnamese Americans. So if, as Democratic candidates contend, the president is a racist, why are people of color at this rally and being welcomed at this rally?
Well, again, the president is unpopular among the American people, and he is especially unpopular among people of color, largely because, I think, of the way that he has treated in his rhetoric, in his language, and sometimes in his policy, people of varied backgrounds in this country who are being singled out for different kinds of harm. You can always find some people to support you or to fill a rally, but the reason for his remarkably high unpopularity, I think, ties back to his failure to address the most important problems that are impacting us as Americans. We're on the cusp of an economic crisis, and he's talking about buying Greenland. We have a huge mental health challenge in this country, and he's making it sound like people with mental illness are to blame for the majority of gun violence in this country. There's no actual plan for dealing with any of the things that are affecting our lives, and I believe that's how he will be defeated. But I also believe he's not going to be defeated automatically. The Democrats could, in fact, find a way to lose this election, and the way we would lose is if we look like all we have to offer is a return to the old status quo, because that wasn't working either. America definitely cannot survive 4 more years of this presidency and be a healthy republic, but we also can't go back to what we had before. It is time for a new normal where the economy actually works for most of us and where we actually feel that our country is getting ahead. We don't have that now, and that's part of how this president got here in the first place.
What about those voters who might feel alienated, though, by those accusations of racism, that they feel lumped in, perhaps unfairly, as a Trump supporter?
Well, I think what we're asking voters to think about is what they are tolerating. There are a lot of people who say they're not voting for him because of the racism, but in spite of it. But what kind of argument is it, first of all, to say that you should tolerate the kind of racial rhetoric of this president? And secondly, his argument up to now has basically been, hey, tolerate the chaos, tolerate the racial remarks, tolerate the bad example for your children. Just put up with all of that because I'm delivering for you economically. But if you actually look at the economy, he's delivering job growth almost as good as we had in the Obama years, and that may be coming to an end. So it's an argument that just doesn't make sense, and I think it cheapens the moral character of voters and of the decision before us. There's any number of reasons why people might have voted the way they did in 2016, but in 2020, I think that he has a very low level of respect for voters' judgment if he thinks they're just going to come along with this forever. We just can't take any more of this. It is exhausting, and more importantly, it is not solving the problems that are actually affecting us in our everyday lives.
The White House is out with a new policy at the border that would end family separation, but then could possibly detain those families indefinitely. I'm guessing you oppose that idea. But what to do about, CNN was reporting 430,000 family members, migrants, coming to the border so far just this year. That seems like an unsustainable number to absorb into this country.
Locking up families is not the solution. Of course, we need a modern and secure border. We also need policies that respect the lawful right to seek asylum and that respect the integrity of the family unit. Things like a family case management program to get these cases cleared quickly and efficiently. But more broadly, we need to fix a broken immigration system that hasn't really gone through major reform in the last 30 years. Remember, this is not the first time we've seen this level of migration. It is the first time that we've seen this level of chaos at the border, and that's a result of the cruelty and the incompetence of an administration from a president who said when he ran for office that he was going to fix this issue. Instead, it has gotten dramatically worse on his watch. And while we're at it, we've also seen a lot of things that shock the conscience of the American people and do not make us safer.
If you're president, how are you approaching what's going on in Hong Kong right now?
Well, first of all, the people in Hong Kong need to know that they have support. The president hasn't supported them, but I will. And China needs to hear the message that if they are going to perpetrate another Tiananmen Square, in the case of Hong Kong, they will be isolated from the community of democratic nations. Nobody's been willing to say that in this White House, but this is a moment where, whether it's Hong Kong, Russia, Saudi Arabia, the world needs America right now. The world needs somebody to be standing up for democratic values and human rights. But it can't be just any America. It has to be an America that's actually living up to our values at home. If we do that, when we do that, it will be better for us and it will be better for the world.
So you've made it this far in the race. There was those humble roots, and now you've got this big-time campaign, $24 million of that big fundraising haul. So how do you reconcile those two things and move forward, both as sort of Mayor Pete from South Bend, Indiana, and this big-time candidate?
Well, Well, this operation began with 4 people sharing a cramped office in South Bend in January, and now we have a top-tier campaign. But there's a long way to go from where we are now to winning the presidency. We know that that's going to come about by way of the hard work that the organizers on the ground are doing. All the fundraising that we've done is mainly in order to build the team that's going to do that unglamorous relationship-building work that happens often quietly out of view in the summer and fall, and is going to lead to victory early next year.
All right, Mr. Mayor, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
We'll see you back here soon.
Good to be with you.
Appreciate it.